Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Courtside with Beilinson Tennis, part of the Tennis Channel Podcast Network. Tonight, we have with us a returning guest in Pete Holtermann, a tennis media public relations veteran. Pete has worked for the ATP Tour and for ESPN. He is the current media director for the Western and Southern Open in Cincinnati, and is also the current media director for the U.S. Men's Clay Court Championships in Houston. He is the president and founder of HolterMedia. Please welcome back to the pod, Pete Holtermann. Pete, thanks again for doing this. I didn't run you off the first time, I guess.
David, thanks for having me back. I really appreciate the chance to chat with you again, and haven't seen you around at the tournaments because everything's been very different since we talked a year ago. So lots to catch up on.
Absolutely. And, you know, when we first released our initial recording, it was in May of 2020 when things were there was so much unknown information going on and events were getting canceled instead of trying to keep them going at the time. And for the listeners, strongly urge you to listen to that conversation with Pete and myself, especially for those that want to get into media / PR. Pete outlines how he got involved in his career, and just, it was very interesting, very, very informative. So again, it was released in May of 2020. Go check that podcast out. But for this focus with you, Pete, it's been crazy since we first talked. And I want to talk about, in May, we didn't know what was going on. The US Open was hanging by a thread. They didn't know Cincinnati was going to be in the bubble with the US Open. Talk about how that all developed. And thankfully we did have a successful Cincinnati and US Open.
Yeah. And I think when we spoke last spring and this came out in May, I don't even think that I had registered the thought that maybe we'd move the Western and Southern Open to New York. I don't even know that had even occurred to me at that point. There were a lot of scenarios that were on the table. And obviously, due diligence, you have to look at all of them. And I think a lot of credit to the USTA and to the team at the Western and Southern Open for finding that solution and to pull those events off. And the WTA had gone out and played, I think, 3 events, a couple in Europe and then one in Lexington prior to the Western Southern Open, but it was the first event back for the men's tour. And I actually remember standing in the lobby of the hotel because there's a lot that had to happen. And so we made a point, as many people as can, there's a lot that has to be done to set the tournament up. But when there's a big wave of players coming, let's try to have some people there just to greet them, make sure they know where to go, what they have to do once they get in and register and everything. And I remember commenting, I made a comment actually to Stacey Allister, the US Open tournament director, and she's reminded me that I told her this a couple times. It felt like being in Australia because there was this first day back at school atmosphere of everybody seeing each other. And it was so awkward because on top of that excitement to see each other, you weren't really sure. I can't hug you. I can't shake your hand. Do we tap elbows? Do we fist? So it's just kind of this different vibe. But the biggest thing was that positive energy of we're back. We're back. We're doing this. This is great. We don't know what this is going to be like. We don't know what to expect. We got to go to our room now and wait for a test result. What's that going to be like? And nobody knew what to expect, but there was that positive energy of we're back. We're back. We're doing this. And I think it actually worked out pretty well that it was a combined event as one of the first ones that really happened. Obviously, again, those WTA events took place, but to bring so many players together in one place, I think it was great that it was everybody together and kind of showed that strength of tennis. And there had been so much Tennis United through the summer and in the layoff. And it was great that we were able to bring everybody back together and then play those events in New York and do it safely. And it kickstarted then what has happened since. And we've played a lot of tournaments and, it's been hard and full credit to, I think everyone involved and, the USTA and Western and Southern Open teams for getting everything together in New York. But there's a lot beyond that. I know, with ESPN, just broadcasting that US Open and even the Western Southern Open, that broadcast, because there's some pieces of the Western Southern Open that are just operationally different than the US Open. And there were things that had to change then from the end of the Western Southern Open to the start of the US Open. And that was hard. Things like back walls and all that. So it was a big operational lift. Every tournament since then as well, everybody's going through their own things, and the myriad of issues that come up that you have to try to figure out, and it's the local jurisdictions, and every government has different rules and regulations, and on top of that you've got the fact that those are changing all the time.
all the time.
And I think the other thing is, and some of those, I mean, that's just like getting people into countries and everything. Like, it's just, everything's harder right now. And I think the other piece of it is, um, while giving credit to those that have happened, a lot of credit to the tournaments that have had to make that really hard decision to not take place. And it was last year, that summer period, the decision was kind of made for tournaments. Now that play is back, it's a really hard decision. It's a really hard thing. Obviously, some are doing it, and the Australian Open financial situation has been widely reported as the losses that they took from playing the tournament. But I think beyond that, the lingering effects of how hard that was on that staff. I mean, every time I heard something, I just felt bad for that staff. And I saw Craig Tiley has said, hey, when we get to April and we've kind of packed up everything from this tournament and we get to that Easter holiday, all of you must disappear for 10 days. I don't want to see any of you. And I think that's really smart, because it's really hard. And whether you're having a tournament, not having a tournament, whether you're in the office of the tour, and not even necessarily out at those events, there's just so much that's going on and going into this. So accolades to the tour staff and to the tournament staffs, and then to the players for navigating through this, because it's hard. And even just figuring out, like, where do you play? It's no longer this easy thing of like, well, this is where I'd like to play. Well, can I even get into that country? And what do I need? Do I need a waiver? And usually you're just worried about a visa. Well, now, do I need some sort of waiver? And if I've been in this country, does that mean I have different entry requirements because I played that tournament before? It's just everything. The agents who are having to figure all that out. Everybody's working really, 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 really hard behind the scenes to make all this happen. And so everybody deserves a kudos for that. I think all of us are collectively really hoping that some of the extra layers of challenges fall away sooner rather than later. And it's great to see crowds back now, and those are growing, and that certainly is a nice boost. But hopefully things are going to start to settle down in the near future. But it's still miles to go before we sleep, I think.
Oh yeah, and I mean, amen, 100% on. Hopefully, some of these challenges are near the end instead of near closer to the beginning, which I think we all are hopeful for. I want to go back to Cincy and New York, and I mean, obviously, that arena is huge, and the premises is gigantic, and yes, the pros may have. Everyone wants fans. Everyone wants that energy there. That said, the pros, there was some preference to it in that they didn't have to waddle through crowds, autographs, all that stuff. They were free to walk around. How was it? I mean, you've been doing this a long time, Pete. When you were there, you're seeing unbelievable matches. And I mean, then you're talking quarters, semis, finals. I mean, the women's semis were, both those matches were insane. And there's no one in the crowd. Like, how was that? It got to be so bizarre.
It was, and to just see the way people, at first everybody was kind of like, well, what do we do? How do we navigate this? And then people started to figure out what was possible. And there are things that will never happen again. There was a couple of the
Knock
writers.
on wood. Knock on wood.
Yeah, exactly. There were I think 10 or 12 media who were on site, writers who were on site, and one of them, every day I'd look out and there he was in the president's box. And I'm like, great, that's a great thing to do now while you can. Don't get too used to it though, because I'm sure you're not going to be going back there anytime soon. Hopefully. So it was a very different atmosphere. And I think the opportunity to move around was valuable. And we know so much more about the virus now than we did then. But I think one of the concerns was a lot of people congregating inside. And that venue, with spectators not being on site, lent itself to then just so much open space and so much opportunity for players to go and relax or get fresh air and be outside, and it was pretty comfortable. And I think that was important, because there was a little bit of trepidation. I mean, players weren't sure what to expect, staff wasn't sure what to expect, nobody really knew how it was going to feel and what it was going to be like. And so the opportunity to have that space, and especially to be outside, I think gave everybody a little bit of comfort and put everybody at ease that, okay, this doesn't feel dangerous. This feels pretty comfortable. Inside the stadium, yeah, it was definitely a unique experience. You're right; those two women's semifinals were two of the best matches I think I've ever seen, and I will say that I was very lucky because I saw more tennis at the U.S. Open than I've ever seen. Normally, I need to be waiting in a corridor somewhere, or hopefully finding a monitor somewhere where I might see a little bit of the action. I was able to sit in Ash and watch more tennis I've ever watched. I don't think I've ever sat at the Rush Stadium and watched a tennis match before, and I was able to do that for most of the U.S. Open. It was great. Even the Western Southern Open, we used Grandstand as our primary stadium court. We were kind of joking, like, geez, some of these players have probably never played out on Grandstand. We're taking Serena out there, and it's like, well, would Serena have ever played on this court? I don't think she would have. Novak, I don't think he would have been out here. So I think it was cool for them to see the grounds in a way they haven't seen, just to be able to walk out to practice courts and see some of those different courts. I mean, it was a very unique experience. Again, I don't think anybody wants to go back to it, but I think everybody was very relieved and thankful for how it was set up, and we're able to get the tournaments going and get play back happening.
Yeah. And we talk about the bubble with Cincinnati and US Open playing in New York. In the beginning of 2021, Del Rey, which usually is in February, gets moved up. Basically the first tournament of the year. I talked to Mark Barron about that, and I was thinking, why didn't maybe you do Miami and Del Rey, or Del Rey and Miami, whichever order, back to back, right? Have that bubble. I talked to Mark about that, and he said that was brought up. It's just, if you were to do that, he said, personally, Del Rey would be competing with other tournaments, one. And two, when they did it, the first tournament of the year, his was the only show in town, basically. So there were a few reasons, with timing obviously being the most important. But the bubble worked, and we'll see. I mean, Del Rey, again, you had small media presence. You had a lot of virtual media presence. Thank you for that. I participated in that, so thank you for that. But no, I mean, very small. I mean, Blair Henley, who does an amazing job in all her events, she was there in person. You have Del Rey. You have Australia. We saw your office at home. We had a reverse, reverse work schedule, school schedule between you and the family. What was that like? I mean, you were pulling the ESPN Bristol hours basically from your house, while your wife and daughter are doing normal US hour things.
Well, thankfully, I have an office that's not in the house, so I was able to go and not disrupt them while I was working all night, and they were able to get good sleep. It was.
Oh, okay.
It was,
I thought that picture was in your house. That was outside.
no, that is an office that I rent here. Actually, my landlord is Mal Washington in that office. Wow. So, and we're in an office park, and next to me is a dentist office. And there were a couple mornings when the patients were arriving for their appointments, so we were still playing, and I was like, it's getting kind of late if they're coming in, because they open at 8 a.m. and I'm like, oh, we're playing past midnight now. So it was a challenge. I mean, it took a lot to kind of shift my schedule to do that and stay up all night. And as someone on Twitter, when I posted that photo, someone rightfully in the comments, kind of, I think playfully, but took a little bit of a jab of like, hey, you're like doing this for work. We do this all the time just because we're fans, and we still have to go work our regular jobs during the day. So yeah, fair point. It was hard. It was very hard. It's different to cover things remotely. And I stole a TV from the house to add a monitor. And I think I had 6 different screens going, and still was like, oh, I can't see this thing that I want to see. But again, to the tournament staff, I mean, Tennis Australia did a tremendous job of making a lot of assets available to us to help us cover as best we could remotely. And they had a lot of forethought, and Darren Pierce and Prue Ryan and Emma, they're great. And the nice thing about tennis, I mean, we talked about Tennis United earlier, there is so much helping each other out. It's not everybody's out to get each other. They talked to Chris Whitmire and Gene Daly and Brendan McIntyre at the USTA. They talked to me about what worked well with Cincy. I've been talking to Sam Henderson quite a bit as he's getting ready for Miami. There's a lot of information sharing that happens because this is different. And I felt like the Australian Open stuff worked better than the US Open stuff, and the US Open stuff worked a little bit better than the Western Southern Open.
Right.
Everybody's
Just
kind of
learn
building on these
exactly.
learnings.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I felt like Del Rey was better than what I had done in Cincinnati. So you kind of figure things out as you go and make the little tweaks. But it was a challenging couple of weeks. And the nice thing was that little window after school before play began, I usually had a couple hours where I could see the family, check in, and then get back to work. So it was a tough couple of weeks. I'd much rather have been in Australia, but I was also thankful that I was not in Bristol, Connecticut, because I think they got like 18 inches of snow over the course of the 2 weeks. So it was nice to avoid that. As much as my Wisconsin roots would have enjoyed it, I'm good with not having to deal with it all the time.
I don't blame you. I don't blame you at all. Unfortunately, for the second year in a row, Indian Wells was postponed. They still haven't canceled it yet, so it's postponed right now. Hopefully, they can do that later in the year. Miami's coming up. Again, it's just going to be different. There are going to be some fans there. The prize money is way down. Any thoughts on what's coming up in Miami?
Listen, kudos to them. Again, everybody figuring out how to make this stuff happen. A tough decision there with not building out that stadium court, but I think it makes sense because that's the way they build out that court. I mean, it's amazing. And if you get the chance in 22 to get down there and see the way they configure that stadium within the football stadium, it's pretty incredible to see. And they did a great job in 2019, and hopefully they can do that again. Again, everything's different, and very few people would have played Miami having come there from Europe, and that's or the Middle East, which is where a lot of these players are going to be coming from. Obviously, some will be coming from, North America, playing in Mexico right now, but just different things. You're not used to this. Nothing's normal. You're not used to necessarily. You're used to playing some of these events after the Australian Open, but even little things like the temperature in Australia was different because it was a month later and it got darker earlier and the shadows in the court were a little bit different. All these subtle little things, you just got to adjust to. And I'm sure as people have been playing the clay court swing now in March instead of February down in South America, things are probably a little bit different. I think Miami, it's great that it's going to happen. It's crowds will be there, which is fantastic that there will be some atmosphere. It's not going to be full. Hopefully we get back to some full crowds soon. It's a good opportunity for players. I mean, I think the outsiders' perspective right now is just trying to wrap their head around what's going on with the rankings, and how will that all play out in the end. And I think time will tell, and it's hard to necessarily read a lot into some of those rankings right now. But I think there are some players who certainly view it as an opportunity, getting into a few more tournaments than they might have otherwise, or flying under the radar of not having the pressure to defend like they would. It's again, everybody has to adapt to all these different circumstances. So it'll be good to see Miami happen. And I can tell you the weather in Florida has been great so far in March. So again, knock on wood, hopefully that holds up. And the nice thing now is we're starting to see players get out and play week in and week out. They're getting some matches, so these men and women are starting to get some miles and start to get into that rhythm of play. And I think that's real important for them. And Indian Wells, it's unfortunate that they weren't able to go. Obviously, the Men's Clay Court Championship in Houston, it's a great event. And as I said, it's a tough call for these tournament directors when they have to make the decision. So hopefully, though, we've demonstrated that we can safely do these tournaments. And now it's a matter of working with all the local jurisdictions and hopefully building out a nice little calendar, and players do get that rhythm going that we're used to seeing them performing.
100%. No, thank you so much for sharing all that. Thank you for taking time doing this with me. I think what I'll say is stay nimble. If you use a pen, I think you probably should switch to pencil because things are changing week to week. Um, I also want to give a shout out to your podcast called Credentials Only, and I'll kind of let you talk about what that's all about.
Yeah, this was a pandemic podcast. I think one of many that I knew I wasn't going to be traveling as aggressively last year. So last April, I started a podcast profiling people who work in sports. One of my favorite journalists is the guy Dick Schaap, and he legend, absolutely. And one of his phrases in the intro to one of his books was that he's a collector of people. And that phrase has always stuck with me. And I find that in sports, there's so much that goes on. And we talked a little bit about it earlier, the tour staff and the tournament staff, all the things they're having to deal with right now to make these games happen. They're unheralded most of the time. And that said, there are a lot of people who want to get into the sports industry. Almost every school now offers a sport management program. And so trying to profile what are all these unique, different jobs within sports and how do people get them? And then what are some lessons that they could get? So I've tried to find people from a wide variety of sports and a wide variety of roles and let them tell their story, find out some of what's unique about what they do, but also how did they get into those roles? And so been a lot of fun. I think for your listeners, because my Rolodex has a lot of tennis people in it, there have been a lot of tennis themed guests. You mentioned Blair Henley, Nick McCarville. I just released one with Kelly Wolf, who's an agent with Octagon. The first one I did was actually the Men's Clay Court Championship tournament director, Bronwyn Greer. So there's a healthy diet of tennis out there. If you are so inclined and want to check it out, I certainly would appreciate the listen and definitely appreciate you letting me talk about it for a minute here on your pod.
Oh yeah, no, without a doubt. And for you avid book readers, get a list ready to go because Pete always asks his guests what are some of their favorite books. So I know I've listened to a bunch of the Credentials Only episodes. I have my list of books, so go check those out. And Pete does such a great job, and he brings on such great guests. So with that, I know you're busy. Best of luck going forward, navigating through this. We're closer to the end, man. We really are. We're getting there. And we're going to get through this. And thanks so much again for hopping back on.
David, thanks so much for having me. And thanks to all your listeners for continuing to support tennis, even through that little pause in our action last year. It's great to see not only the players back out playing, but starting to see the fans come back and to still see that activity, social media in particular, of fans tuned in and watching and enjoying these great athletes playing the game we love.
I appreciate it, Pete. Best of luck.